Hello, welcome to Unit 1, 1491 to 1607, European Encounters in the New World. Unit 1 is worth 5% of the weight on the AP exam, so there's not going to be a lot of questions about it. The guiding question that you need to keep in the back of your head throughout this entire unit: what were the causes and effects of European exploration and encounters with Native Americans in the New World? Causes and effects, European exploration on Native Americans in the New World. That's what you want to keep in mind. Think about the map of North America. So there's a very little bit of an intro to life before 1491. The indigenous people migrated over the land bridge from Asia. They settled throughout North and South America. The point you need to understand is that there were people in North and South America, Central America, when the Europeans came. It was not just an uninhabited landmass. There were people there. The native indigenous people in North America kind of based their societies around the economy. So how could they get food? How are they going to survive? If you look at the map, there were villages in the southeast. They were able to plant crops. That meant that they could be fairly sedentary. They weren't going to be roaming around looking for their food source. Compare that to Indians on the Great Plains, and they were nomadic. They had to follow the buffalo. They had to go where the food was, and the food had four legs, and it was always running away from them. So they were a pretty migratory groups of people. In the American Southwest, modern day New Mexico, Arizona, it's a really dry, arid part of the country. The Indian tribes that settled there mastered irrigation. They were able to figure out ways to bring in water from the rivers, the few rivers that are there, and use them to plant crops. That's where we have a big influence of corn, maize. We talk about three sister farming, where the corn and the beans, they could all be grown together, and what one crop released would benefit the growth of the other crops. And then there were fishermen tribes along the coastline. So really what you need to understand going into Native American studies for this first unit is the idea that tribes tended to settle where the food was, and they adapted their lifestyle according to what their food source was, whether it was going to be planted crops, or it needed water, or it was animal hunting. That's how they sort of created their individual societies. In 1491, when this unit kicks off, when officially AP history kicks off, that's when Columbus launches his expedition into the New World. When Columbus landed in the New World, that's going to be the beginning of European colonization and settlement and conquest of the Americas. The key sort of term that you'll need to understand out of this unit is the phrase Columbian Exchange. You probably know this from world history already, but the Columbian Exchange is crucial for understanding this time period. It is the exchange of goods, animals, diseases, back and forth between the Old World and the New World. The Old World Europeans brought guns to the New World. They brought horses, they brought cattle, things that we tend to identify with 19th century kind of Native American societies. The Native Americans in the New World, they sent to the Old World a lot of food, a lot of diseases as well. The big disease that the Europeans sort of inflicted on the Native American tribes was smallpox. Smallpox decimated the native civilizations within 5-10 years of European arrival. The native people, not sent necessarily, but kind of traded syphilis back to the Europeans. The fruits and vegetables in the New World really helped to repopulate Europe after the Black Death, after the plague, after a devastation of 100 years worth of disease and famine and wars and poverty. A lot of the European population numbers rose as a result of food products and new nutrients coming into the European diet. So the Columbian Exchange is super important for you to understand as far as a consequence of the European conquest of North America. European colonization, if you look at the map of North America, Really what you'll see is you need to understand kind of the areas of European conquest. The Spanish settled first. They tended to settle in Florida as well as in the American Southwest. Those areas today still have a very heavy Spanish influence because of that original colonization by the Spaniards. The Spaniards' goals in settling in the New World: God, gold, glory. They wanted to spread Christianity, Catholic Christianity, because Protestantism hadn't been established yet. That's not till 1517 over in Europe. They wanted to convert the native people to Catholic Christianity. The idea of finding gold, bringing riches back into the world of Spanish finance. They wanted to be able to raise the Spanish economy on the back of gold and silver and precious metals that were found in North America. And then glory of Spain. This is an era of exploration. And so you had Spain competing with England and Portugal and other major European nations for glory, for preeminence in this global empire. The Spanish colonization is characterized by wars with natives. They weren't necessarily fully assimilating into or allowing the native societies to assimilate into Spanish culture. It was much more of a period of conquest by the Spanish over the native peoples. There were periodic revolts by the native people when they fought back against the Spaniards. Probably the most well-known is the Pueblo Revolt in the American Southwest, where the native people were revolting against Spanish enforcement of Catholic practices. They didn't want to give up their own indigenous religion and their own indigenous culture. There was an exception to sort of this idea of conquest by the Spaniards, and that was a Spanish priest named Bartolome de las Casas. De las Casas believed in the humanity of the indigenous people, and he wrote letters back to the Spanish government, the Spanish religious leaders, saying, hey, these are humans. These are people who we need to treat better. Didn't necessarily go very far. It didn't necessarily change a lot of the attitudes, but it does show that there was not just this universal belief that all Spaniards wanted to conquer all indigenous people. There were some outliers and some exceptions. Because of wars in Europe, there were conflicts in the European countries over on the continent. And some of what was happening over in the European continent affected how areas were settled in the New World, specifically in North America. France is going to be the other major sort of landholder in North America. They tended to settle in Canada, especially in the northeastern parts of Canada, as well as the Mississippi River Valley. If you think about New Orleans today, there's a heavy French influence in New Orleans, and that goes back to the French settlement. The French who settled in North America tended to be young single men, and they traded with the Indians. They worked with the Indians. There were a lot of intermarriage relationships between Indian tribes and the French settlers who were coming. The French did not settle in large sort of family packs. They tended to be those young single guys, and they were there to make money. They were in North America to make money, to trade. A lot of fur trading it was a way for them to enrich their own coffers back over in France. And then the final European group before we get to the English settlement of North America, that's going to be the Dutch. The Dutch settled in a pretty small area, just the Hudson River Valley in New York, what is today New York. They were traders. They did come as family units, but they also came as single men. But really, they were there to trade. There wasn't a lot of interaction outside of economic interaction between the native tribes and the Dutch. The Dutch were not in North America for very long because of wars happening over in Europe. The Dutch lost a pretty significant naval battle to the English. And as part of the consequence of losing that battle, the Dutch were able to give up their lands in North America, retreat back to Europe, and that's how the English originally acquired possessions in the North American continent. Unit 2, we're going to get into English settlement of North America, but for Unit 1, again, it's a very small portion of the AP exam. You need to know Columbian Exchange. You need to sort of understand the landforms that we're talking about, and you need to understand a general idea of where the Spanish settled, where the French settled, and where the Dutch settled in New York. Thanks a lot.